Tony Brown. Nice to see you on the call, and welcome to the show, to our Global Quantum Business Show.
Lovely to be here, John.
So, Tony, you've had a very interesting career in retail for more years than you probably care to remember. What attracted you to retail all those years ago?
Well, I was a mechanic when I was first introduced to retail through a family friend. And back in the day when I was a mechanic, you spent your days lying on cold concrete floors in dirty workshops. And a friend of mine introduced me to what could be described as the most basic level of retail. My father was in retail at the time, so I thought I've had enough of cold hands and dirty spanners. So that's why I went into retail.
Okay. So you've had a very illustrious career, beginning, I guess, a major port with a very topical person at the moment, Sir Philip Green and the Arcadia Group. Can you just briefly give people a quick background of what that involved?
Well, actually, my career started with Asda. I was 19 years in the food business. So that's when my retail career started. But I guess I only really started to learn the intricacies of supply chain management and business management with the Arcadia Group. Back in the day, it wasn't Arcadia, it was just BHS. And I joined BHS just after Philip Green acquired the business. But I joined through a chap called Alan Leighton, who was the then chairman of British Home Stores. So that's when I guess I really started to earn my spurs as a retail businessman rather than a retail operator. Masses of learning with inside that arena. I worked very closely with Philip for 8 years. In fact, my office was literally next door to his. So should we say when he became a little bit one of his black moods, mine was the first office he kicked the door in. Not necessarily for anything I'd done, but life was like that back in the day when we were turning BHS round.
Yeah.
Those were 18-hour days, 7 days a week, getting into the minutiae of business, of stock turns and supply chain management and fabric control, etc., etc. So that's where I can honestly say that's where I really started to learn my retail spurs and business management spurs, was back in those days.
Interesting. So that went from what must have been a billion turnover business to when you were appointed into the Beals Group, which was a family-run organisation and very well-known, iconic Bournemouth store that went through an expansion. When you acquired, I think it was 32 other department stores. Can you just share some experience in that role when you were the chief of the engine?
Yeah, I think if you go slightly back a bit to my last year, if you like, at BHS, because Philip had moved on to the Arcadia Group, so I was taking a much exaggerated role inside BHS, but I wasn't in charge. The decisions and financial decisions were made elsewhere. So that's when I decided I actually wanted to go and try my hand at being the CEO of a company. And the opportunity came along. Perversely, I got a call from the headhunter who said they had this small family business. It was actually a PLC at the time, but it was a family business. But the only problem was it was in Bournemouth. Well, little did the headhunter know that I actually lived in the New Forest. So I was on the doorstep and I knew the business well. So that's when I thought, well, okay, I can go from this £1 billion business to this very, very small nine department store business doing about 14-15 million a year, which was okay for the size of the business, with only 9 stores. And I always remember my first day in the job together. We called them store directors in those days, and there was 9 people there. The meeting, my last meeting at BHS in front of the store managers was over 200.
Yeah.
And support staff, so that was getting close on to an 800 people meeting. So very, very different. But the stuff I'd learned in BHS about supply chain management, about price management, about price architecture, was the first thing I started to integrate into the Beals business. And after a year of managing it that way, managing the cash, because that was back in 2008. So I joined in June 2008, and in September 2008, the world economy collapsed. And that threw a huge amount of problems that I'd never had to deal with. So banking covenants started to be strained. Credit facilities started to be pushed out. Uma Hurley's and Atradius withdrew all cover on most retailers. So, and we also had a pension fund that was biting at my heels as well. So I had the bank, the pension funds, the suppliers, everybody was in turmoil. So that was a real baptism of fire of having to manage cash on a daily basis, but also managing your supply chain on a daily basis from people who were very nervous about anybody who didn't have credit insurance. But we managed to bring all our stakeholders together. We managed to convince the banks to stay on board, which is HSBC at the time. And we managed to convince the pension fund to not pull the plug, to stay with us. And that's really where we started to turn the corner. So out of that adversary situation, we managed to turn the corner by turning our stakeholders into even more stakeholders in the business, and supporting our growth potential, if you like. So that was a big turning point for Beals. And that's when other businesses, other department store groups started to suffer because they didn't take the day-to-day management of the business as serious as we did. And most importantly, they didn't take the product management very seriously. They were very strategic in what they were doing. We were down to how many of these handbags can I sell, and how many can I sell at this price? So now go out and buy that amount of handbags or teapots or whatever it was we were selling. We got down to product detail, and I got involved in all the buying, all the pricing decisions, all the margin decisions, and we managed it very, very closely. Other department store chains didn't. And that's where we started to acquire different businesses. The first one we bought was a co-op in Rotherham, which worked very well for us from a financial point of view. And then we set our sights at the big one, which was Westgate Department Stores. So I think within 4 years, we moved from 9 to best part of 30 odd department stores, without a huge capital outlay, because the other thing I learned at BHS was how to manage, never use your own money to buy anything, and always put the emphasis on the other party, because if they want to sell, they need to sell for a reason. So we got some quite nice inducements to take these businesses on, which worked out from a working capital point of view. They were self-funding from day one. So, and that gave us more power, more buying power, without increasing our costs. And I think within the first 2 years, we moved into the 32 stores, but our actual headcount after the first 2 years has stayed exactly the same. So There's a lot of fat to be taken out of those businesses.
Yep, great economies of scale.
Yeah.
So there's a great example to people out there out of adversity. I'm sure there's plenty of business owners thinking back to the GFC, global financial crisis back in 2008, and you seized an opportunity and turned around. Beals must have been 100, 200-year-old store at that time.
Oh, it was, yeah. We were, and some of the practices that we had was just as old. Yep. It was an interesting time.
Yeah. So very interesting. So aside from the obvious, Tony, what's changed in retailing over the years, and where do you see it going in the future?
I think from a department store point of view, because obviously I've been in both ends. I've been in food, I've been in 99p business, so I've and internationally. So I think from a department store point of view, the supply chains are becoming very integrated into your business. I think the COVID situation has demonstrated the fragility of supply chains, which I can go into later. I think technology, as far as having people understanding what omni-channel means. A lot of people think omni-channel is having a store business and an online business. Actually, it's having one business, and creating the scale that you need you don't have to have huge different parts of the business that are purely dedicated to online. You can integrate it into one business, which is what we've done in the new Beals. So I think that the omni-channel is the biggest change that we've seen. I think the millennials, I think they have changed the way people shop and will continue to change the way people shop. I mean, those millennials are now in their early 20s. In 10 years' time, they'll be in their early 30s, but their buying patterns won't change. The way they shop won't change. The way they move from brand to brand won't change, because that's who they are. That's in their DNA. And you see that probably more prominently in cosmetics, and the change in cosmetic sales, especially in department stores. The big brands have suffered, the Macs of the world, the Bobbi Browns of the world, Chanel, etc. And that millennial group are far more prone to use new influencer brands than the standard brands. I mean, if I look at the millennials in my family, and we have a few of them, they buy more of their color online than they do in stores now. And that's a principal change that I think department stores have to get to grips on. Those anchor brands are no longer anchor brands.
Yep. So Tony, we'll have a lot of smaller retailers on this show over the next day or so. Is there anything specific, if you had to say one or two things, if you had a small one place shop in retail at the moment, what would be the one or two things that you'd suggest that those people address immediately?
I think most of them are very obvious. One is your cash. You don't go out of business by losing money. You go out of business by running out of it. And it's that day-to-day cash management, which I think in these circumstances with COVID and inconsistent customer profiles and the way people shop, that's the critical one for me. I think also really cementing in your supply chain. Yep. Where are you getting your product from? Are they safe? And really getting to grips with that partnership with your suppliers and yourself. It shouldn't be adversarial. It should be hand in hand. So those two things, your suppliers and your cash flow. Great
tips. So, and so thinking about what about COVID specifically, Tony? Is there anything out there that you think, how do I get through the next couple of months through until they get this vaccine, if it's effective, organised?
I think it's a very, very difficult one, because I've come from this morning meeting with my accountants and trying to forecast where trade is going to be in January, February, March, and April is almost impossible. You just don't know. So I think all you can do is follow your trends on a weekly basis, and follow your forward cash flows on a weekly basis. So I think that's changed dramatically. I think those businesses who have set up an omni-channel business, an online business that you fulfill from your own premises, I think investing in that is critical at this time, even though I think, and I know this from our own experience in Beals now, it costs more to invest in that from a marketing point of view, from a Google Ads point of view. It's critical to keep your brand and keep some cash flow going. So I think those bits, making people feel safe in your stores, is critical, which I think most people have got down to pat now. I think most people are doing that. The other part of it is to understand that the supply chains around the world are broken. They are fundamentally broken at the moment. So you can't rely on that constant replenishment of stock, because it simply isn't there at some point. I mean, you've got breakdown from China, also from Bangladesh, from India, from Vietnam. You've got increasing prices on containers. The price of a container has gone up from an average £2,500 to £5,000.
I saw a feature on the news last night where they had, I don't know how many, it was hundreds of thousands of containers, all empty, all in the wrong space at the moment.
Yeah. So it's costing a lot of money to get stock to the port. And when you can get them through the ports, it's costing a lot as well. That's where you need to have a really good relationship with your supply chain to really understand what's going to be available and when it's going to be available. I'm seeing myself, orders I've placed and paid for simply aren't being fulfilled when they said they would.
Yep.
Not because the supplier wants to turn us over. The supplier is at the beck and call of the manufacturer.
Yep.
And the freight forwarders. So it's a very complex business at the moment. So it is staying on top of it on a daily, weekly basis.
I'm just thinking, I've spoken to many people out there in business that have been reluctant. The government here in the UK, as you know, have been, people can complain and be critical, but by and large, they've offered things like these BBL £50,000 loans, 250,000 C-bill loans at no repayment for a year, 2.5% after, which to me is the best money I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And yet some people are reluctant to take it. What would you say in a couple of words to the people out there that if they had the ability and weren't taking it?
Well, I would say that you need to examine yourself because you're not looking after your business by not taking it. You're being very short-sighted. This will end. COVID will end at some point. And if you're not strong coming out of it, then your business will not be strong, for the next 2 or 3 years. It will take you 2 or 3 years. There's support on offer. There's flexible support on offer, not just the loans, but furloughing people, et cetera. And the flexibility of the furlough scheme should be being used by everybody. Yep. Because we will pay for it in our taxes going forward at some point. So why not take advantage of it now? If you don't need all your people in January and you can furlough them or even furlough them part-time, do it. Have that confidence that you've got the support of the government, you've got cash there you can use. If you want a strong business afterwards, use the tools at your disposal.
Yep. That leads me nicely into my next question. You've got lots of staff. Most of the businesses out there might only have 1 or 2. But how do you keep up productivity and getting more rowing in the same direction? Have you got any quick tips on any strategies that you people might help with?
Yeah, I think where we're finding it successful at the moment is people need jobs, and especially in retail, there's so many jobs being lost. So our people are very happy to be in work. So you're starting from a good place. 2, if you communicate absolutely transparently with what's going on and what we need from people, they are getting involved. And we're seeing productivity levels probably twice what we used to see before COVID. Because there's a paramount opportunity for people to work, and people need to work, and they understand the furlough situation. So, it really is the opportunity to motivate people, keep people informed with transparent information, frank, candid, transparent information, and get them doing things around the store, things that they haven't done in the past. We've moved people, on the last shutdown from shop floor to fulfillment center from our store point of view. And we have people packing bags, sending people off, doing refi, et cetera, online. So it's having that multifaceted approach. You haven't got individuals who, I'm the supervisor for ladies wear, so that's what I'm going to do. That's gone. That is absolutely gone.
Yep.
And people are far more willing to be multifaceted and support the business than they ever have in the past, because they can see the business supporting them.
Yep, brilliant. So Tony, you've got some grown-up children who are also in business. What advice did you give them when they were just kicking off?
I think principally it is about understanding who your customer is and serving that customer. I've got one son who's got his own joinery business. He's a one-man band. He's not run a business before. He's fallen into this business. We've supported him and et cetera. And it's how he manages his customers, but also how he manages his finances. Because you can't take it for granted that people are going to pay you. So, if you're the end supplier and you're building something for somebody, you've got to make sure you're covered. And certainly my son got himself into not difficulty, but he got let down by a few customers by not being forthright up front. So having that candid relationship with your customers, but also it is about, you know, whatever they're doing in life, whatever businesses they're running, it's about family. It's about, you know, there are bigger things. I mean, I often say to my people, we sell dresses, we don't save lives. So, you know, keep everything in perspective.
Yep.
Manage yourself well. You know, there's some principles in life. Do your job. Number one, do your job. Yeah. And two, commit to doing your job. And then everything else follows afterwards. So it is that, you know, keep a solid head, keep your feet on the ground, work with your supply base, work with your customers, but never forget, you know, whatever you do, unless you are a doctor, and I've got no doctors in my family, you're not saving lives.
Yeah, good points. Tony, most retailers suffer with stock pile-ups at some time where they need to clear it, and you know, we all see these massive discount sales and all sorts of things. But what are the best strategies that you've found about clearing any stock that a small retailer might have effectively and with value?
Oh, right. I mean, that's a. I mean, every retailer faces that all the time. Where I've learned, should I say, to manage stock and weeks cover, it is all about, you know, you cannot make money by holding on to stock. It's impossible. You know, and I've seen many retailers who think that selling something at a lower margin than they'd expect is actually failure. It's actually success, because you've got to turn that stock to cash as quickly as you can, because you don't go out of business by by losing money. You go out of business by running out of it. And it's that principle that you've got to keep your stock at a level where you know you can clear it. It's the pricing strategies that sit behind that. Always price with a way out. In BHS, we priced with a way out. So if you haven't got a way out on your initial pricing, you are going to get lumbered with stock because you've got nowhere to go, and it will inform your decisions not to mark down stock. The second thing is your buyers, and this is a critical one for some of the bigger companies. Your buyers will always own a product when they buy it. They will not own it once it gets to the shop. And it's making sure that your buyers have their feet held to the fire on how they're managing their stock turns. And it's that stock turn that you need to keep people feet to the fire on. You know, it's no point saying, you know, I've got a 90 margin on this product if you're not selling any. So it's you know, not letting your buyers buy any more stock unless they've got a good stock turn on what they've got already.
Yeah.
And I think the best business leaders, whether you're in a small business or a large business, keep their eye on their stocks. They manage it at that level. I see, and always have done ever since my BHS days, I see every single product, every single pricing, and every single stock turn. I know it, and you've got to know it. And we did the same in BHS. That's why we worked so hard in the initial days, understanding every product, every margin, and every sell-through.
Brilliant advice. Tony, you've been around and mixed in some interesting circles over your career. What's the most interesting person that you've ever run into, and why was that?
Well, it depends whether you think about interesting or infamous. I think interesting, certainly Alan Layton and Archie Norman. If you want, you know, big brains, you know, and to learn from big brains, those two are phenomenal, especially Archie. Yeah, I mean, his intellect is frightening. So I learned a lot in my Asda days, even though I wasn't at the forefront of what Asda were doing. I was an operator, I was a regional manager, a regional managing director. So I can't say that I was in the forefront of decision making, but I was at the end of the decision making. So I think their brains, I think they're the most interesting. I think Philip Green, probably the most infamous person I've worked with, is a character. He has his flaws, without a doubt. But I'll tell you now, you know, he also has, you know, huge business acumen, especially in managing property, in managing suppliers, and understanding the intricacies of pricing. So I learned a lot from that. I also learned a lot what not to do. But you know, you gather these people around you, you take the best bits, and you try to put them into your own DNA. So I would say those three people There's been others as well. My time in Australia was fascinating, and the business I worked for there. So there's lots of people that have helped develop my retail DNA. But I would say, from a practical application of my own management style, those three are probably the most significant.
Interesting. So Tony, you've had a long career. If you had the opportunity to do something different, knowing now what you know, and applying that to a 20-year-old Tony Brown, what would you have done differently?
I think, what would I have done differently? I think I'd have started to learn some of the more technical aspects earlier. When you're a young buck in retail, you're running around at 100 miles an hour, and you're making mistakes as you go, but you don't necessarily learn from those mistakes straight away. I think get hold of as many business books as you can, read and understand them, talk to people who do know better than you. Certainly, if I go back to my early days in Asda, no one could teach me anything. I knew it all, but in fact I didn't. And you only start to learn in your later years, in your early 30s, that you don't know it all. And if I could say anything to the young Tony Brown, I would say, listen more, understand more, and but still keep your energy levels that you had when you were in your 20s and 30s. In fact, I still think I've got those energy levels.
Okay. So Tony, you're now off in your own rebranded Beals, which is another exciting chapter. Can you just share briefly what that involves?
I think what that's given us the opportunity to doing is the old Beals, because I was obviously in and out of Beals twice. Well, actually 3 times now, you can say. When I left Beals the first time, it was in, I would say, and it was a good financial position with the right level of stores and infrastructure. When I came back, it had been damaged by a CVA, and probably some decisions I wouldn't have made, but that's the way life goes. And we managed to rebuild that, and I did an MBO, knowing that the MBO was quite risky anyway. And then everything caught up on us, so we had to let it go. And I think there was a right decision from our creditors' point of view to put it through administration to make sure our secured creditors got out and got out fairly. The new business, I think it's allowed us to start again. It's allowed us to jettison all the old practices that were historical. I think most importantly, it's enabled us to put a new ERP system in that is more functional than the last one. It's allowed us to re-engage with our supply base. And I've got to say, from a supply base point of view, everyone which we dealt with in the old Beals, and we're dealing with this one, have come back on board. One, because they saw we were trying to do the best we could in a very difficult situation for them. But 2, everybody's got to do business. And we were able to put new terms in place that helped us and helped the supplier as well. So I think they're the main differences. Plus, we've been able to put into a real omni-channel business where we're fulfilling everything from the store. So the economies of productivity are much, much better now. And our online presence is far more streamlined because we were able to put a brand new system in and a brand new website. So the new company, New Start 2020, that trades under the name Beals, has a much better chance of surviving, God willing, with this pandemic than we had in the past.
Interesting. So what's the next chapter in your journey?
Hopefully go to the beach. But I think we'll try to take on a couple of stores in the next 2 to 3 years to leverage the economies of scale a bit more. I think really developing the business so I can be a lot more hands-off. I'm reasonably hands-off at the moment. I've got a reasonably good team in place. So it is just sort of nurturing from the sidelines rather than the full-on CEO role that you normally see. And then, I hope to be a bit more of a going plural, take on a few more NED roles, etc., etc. So I think just expanding myself that way.
Okay. Tony, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you as part of this group, and I'm sure any budding retailers and people that are in retail out there in the world will take a lot of value away from this discussion. I really appreciate your time. And Brown, thank you very much.
Cheers, John. You take good care. Stay in touch.
Will do.